Hi everyone, this is William. If you just watched the video I posted previous to this one, in which I also am wearing my serious jacket, about Dmitri's time, Dmitri beginning to talk about his time in Berlin, then you know that I decided to do an addendum to that video so that I could talk about this book. And I think to put what Dmitri says in his diaries in perspective, we need to turn to other works as well. It's not good enough to just read his diaries without any kind of broader context. And that certainly isn't the way that scholars do things. So I hope you, if you really want to understand him, particularly if any of you are writing about him, I hope you will bear with me and come along for the ride on this part of revealing who Dmitri was. Okay, so I showed this book. It is Russia and Germany by Walter Lecoeur. So Russia and Germany, A Century of Conflict, published in 1965. So it's an older book. I got it used, so I don't know who scribbled in it, and I've never had the cover. But I read it, but it's been several years ago, and obviously I needed to reread it, and I'm glad I decided to have a look at it today because it's really helping me put things in perspective with the emigres in Berlin. So I have this other book that is all about the Russian emigres in France, and they were a very different breed from the Russian emigres in Germany. And Dmitri certainly belonged both in his geographical location where he lived and in his personal proclivities. He definitely belonged to the Paris emigres and not to the German emigres, or the Berlin / Munich emigres. But anyway, I was just skimming the book today, but I want to just basically read to you the parts in the chapter called Hitler's Mentors. It's chapter 4 of the book, The Rise of National Socialism, Part 1, Hitler's Memoirs. So we're talking about this period between about, 1920 and 1923, roughly, in this particular chapter. All right, so let's start. We're starting with a fellow named Scheubner Richter, who had been living in the Russian Empire as a Russian citizen, or rather as a Russian subject, the subject of the crown. But he was a Baltic German. And so, not all Baltic Germans were extremists, God forbid. I'm sure the vast majority of them weren't. But there were some, like Scheubner Richter, who were able, because of their, German surnames and possibly, probably speaking German as well, they were able to make contacts in Germany. And Germany was where they wanted to settle at this particular moment in time when nationalism was growing everywhere, but was particularly organized and strong, or beginning to be, in Italy and in Germany. So being out there and very, very zealously trying to support Hitler and the very early National Socialist Party was this Baltic German Scheubner Richter. And he was a good liaison between the Russian or the German fascists and the Russian right wing in Germany. And I found this the first thing that caught my eye was that in going around trying to fundraise on behalf of Hitler and the National Socialists, which apparently he was successful, a certain name comes up. So I will read you this part of a paragraph. He, Scheubner Richter, is said to have received meaning funds, support, from the former Bavarian monarchs, the House of Wittelsbach, as well as from one of the two pretenders to the Tsardom of Russia, Prince Kirill of Coburg. Kirill's wife, Victoria Fyodorovna, put at Ludendorff's disposal an enormous sum between 1922 and 1924 for distribution among the German right-wing extremist organizations. Well, as I said, Walter Lecoeur was a scholar among scholars, and he was born in Germany. He was a German historian, a German Jewish historian, if you consider that relevant. And he had, in any celebrated university that you can think of in the U.S., Georgetown, Harvard, you name it, he was a fellow at, or was respected at, or gave lectures at. And his notations are superb. I always have told my nieces and nephews and other people who are interested in history, simply do not read a book that doesn't have a bibliography and notes, and doesn't have notes in more than one language. And you read some of the notes and make sure that the works cited are serious works. And Lecoeur certainly does that. Now, in his note for this particular allegation about Kirill, and especially Ducky, Victoria Melita, he is citing documents that, let's see, he's Bericht über die russische monarchistische Organisation in der Emigration, a detailed report dated October 18th, 1935, addressed to Hitler by General Biskupski, or a member of his entourage, quoted in the following as Bericht. And then he gives you where you can find this document in the National Archives in Washington. So Biskupski was probably the number one Russian right-wing zealot who was an emigre there in Germany. And so this is something that he claimed, that Kirill, primarily through the influence of his wife, Victoria, had put an enormous sum, in quotes, into the hands of the National Socialists between 1922 and 1924. So my reason for mentioning all this is strictly scholarly. I'm not trying to disparage anyone's memory, but we need to, if you're interested in history at all, if we want to have a correct understanding of history, instead of making, it's impossible not to make value judgments now and then. I certainly don't think that this was a good thing. I think it was a stain on both Kirill and Victoria. If it's true, as Biskupski alleged, then yeah, I think it's bad. But as a historian, I'm not here to make value judgments. I'm here to say here's where the documentation leads us, and it's relevant because because this is going all the way up to the Russian pretender in exile, this relationship. And it's one part, only one part, one small part of what the Russian emigres were doing. But because it involved members of the imperial family, it's relevant to what we're looking at with Dmitri and to what he was doing. He was not on board with this. We know that. Okay, but anyway, Where was I going with that? Yeah, okay, so let's move on because now I've forgotten. So Lacour also mentions that there were other notable Russian contributors, many of them involved in oil, industrialists involved in oil, and so he mentions the name Gukasov, and the names Gukasov and Lenisov, and those names mean nothing to me. But anyway, so going on, here's a couple of paragraphs that I'd like to read at length. So in 1920, many Russian emigres still refused to accept their defeat and exile as final. True. They hoped that the Soviet government would somehow be overthrown from within or collapse as the result of its own incapacity, or perhaps be ejected as the result of some new foreign intervention. There was, consequently, a great deal of activity in the centers of the Russian immigration, but there was also a great deal of dissension, of personal and political strife, of mutual recrimination, not only between left, right, and center, but also within each faction of the emigration. The emigres accused each other of weakness and cowardice, if not outright treason, in their past and present behavior. They quarreled about their present foreign political orientation and the shape of the Russia that was to emerge after the successful counter-revolution, and our friend Dmitri was right there in the center of this, and he very much wanted to be a conciliator, someone who helped the Russian emigres to come together as a united front and put political differences aside, and we'll get into more of that later. But I commend him for that. That is what he saw really as his role. All right. On the extreme right wing, too, conditions in 1920 were pretty chaotic. One group had opted for Germany and preached German-Russian cooperation in the fight for a new Russia, but there were degrees of collaboration. Prince Bermont Avalov in Berlin, for instance, was considered to be, to all intents and purposes, a German agent. He had raised a small army in the Baltic in 1919 to fight together with the German Freikorps against the Bolsheviks. His enemies, who were extremely numerous, doubted both his princely origin and his military qualifications. Another group, also centered in Berlin, consisted mainly of former members or sympathizers of the Soyuz Russkogo Naroda, the Black Hundreds of Tsarist days, who regarded everyone slightly more liberal than themselves as a traitor to the Russian cause. But many conservatives regarded these extremists as mere scum, foreign agents or provocateurs, not much better than the Bolsheviks. There were bitter disputes about their foreign political orientation. Instinctively, many Russians disliked the Germans and distrusted German intentions with regard to Russia's future. How can we possibly cooperate with Ludendorff, they asked, the very man who brought Lenin to Russia in a sealed railway compartment. Eventually, there were even two pretenders to the throne of the Tsar, Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich, who had married a German princess, Victoria, settled in Coburg and followed a pre-German orientation, and Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich in France, who was pro-French and had the support of the majority of the right-wing emigration. So, as you can see, Dmitri is not mentioned. And personally, I don't consider Nikolai Nikolaevich to have ever been a pretender to the throne. I think he just had no interest in that. What he wanted to be was the acknowledged head of the imperial family, and, making sure that everything was done in a non-extreme kind of way, and that there was not internal strife that was pulling them apart. But I'm not even sure how zealous he wanted that role, because I think more or less what he really wanted was just to live in retirement. So yeah, Dmitri, once he gave up his claim to being one of the pretenders, was just forgotten about. So when you read books about the Russian emigres, general books like this one, or from that matter, this one. You're not reading about Dmitri in his capacity as at one time having been, I would say, even the leading contender for the throne, the one that various other governments were really interested in, for one thing. Okay, so then we have this, a little more information on Reichenhall, that conference. So La Cour says Scheubner Richter was the main organizer of the Great Monarchist Congress in Bad Reichenhall in late May 1921, the most ambitious attempt to bring all Russian right-wingers together on one platform. So Galeevsky was there, as I said. Guess where our friend Dmitri was? He was not there, but he was preoccupied with something else. He was in the south of France with Coco Chanel. So that's what we are going to be reading about in May 1921. I can't even remember if he mentions the Bad Reichenhall conference, because after what happens in the aftermath of Berlin, he is done with that. Sounds quite an abrupt change of direction, doesn't it? Well, it is, and we'll find out how that came about. So thank you for watching this one. All 2 or 3 or 4 of you, I doubt it will be more than that. But if I offend anyone, it's regrettable, but, you know, it is what it is. And even if you are in disagreement with anything that I personally feel, come along for the ride anyway. So I hope to see you then with the next Dmitri Diary video. Bye.